Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, as part of our survey of post-war French cinema, it's our pleasure to present the comic masterpiece, Mr Hulot's Holidays, Les Vacances de Mr Hulot, written and directed by Jacques Tati, who plays the iconic figure of Mr Hulot. We'll be talking about that figure and a number of other aspects of the comic artistry of Jacques Tati after today's screening. Joining us will be the biographer of Jacques Tati, Professor David Bellos from Princeton University. Now, enjoy this great vacation with Mr Hulot. Welcome back from the beach and one of the greatest vacations available in the history of the movies. This is not only a film that marks the arrival of Mr Hulot on the screen from the great Jacques Tati. It's a classic of French cinema, but it's also a beloved classic of all comic cinema in the history of the movies. This is a very rich film as well as being a delightful film, and we've got 30 minutes to talk about that. It's a special treat to have with us today Professor David Bellos, who is a biographer of Jacques Tati. David, who's been in the United States since 1997, teaches at Princeton University, where he's a specialist in 19th and 20th century literature. Those who follow 20th century French literature may know him also as the biographer of Georges Perec. And he's known for numerous translations of 19th and 20th century French authors. But of course, you're here today because of Jacques Tati. David, welcome to City Cinematheque.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So let's turn back the clock to 1952, 1953. Who's Jacques Tati at this particular moment as, you know, as an artist and as somebody making his second film? Because we're at the birth of Mr Hulot.
Well, 1951-52, when this idea first arises, Jacques Tati is a former music hall star, a music hall mime artist, who has made a rollicking comedy called Jour de Fête, or The Postman's Big Day, as it was sometimes called in the US, which is a largely slapstick comedy about rural life in France. It's mildly and kindly, in a kindly way, anti-American, but it's above all a celebration of the comic aspects of small-town life in France. It had become very popular. Jacques Tati was a bankable asset, and he was looking around for a new project. Jour de Fête was shot immediately after the Second World War, and it appeared in 1947. So Tati didn't rush straight into making another film. He took his time over it, as he took his time over everything. Tati was a slow perfectionist and very controlling sort of man. And he hadn't quite stopped being a music hall artiste. He was doing his show of sporting impressions even as late as 1951 in Lyon. And a couple of the actors you see in Mr Hulots Holidays, he actually picked up from his contacts in the music hall world.
Okay. And so is there precedent in the things that he's been doing as a significant performer for the creation of Hulot?
No. No, Hulot is something
That's
quite new. It really is not like the postman François in Jour de Fête. It is not like the characters in the few comic shorts that he made before the war. Obviously it has links with all of them because he acts all of them, and it's the same body, exploiting the long legs and the gawky posture. But as a creation, as an idea, as a project, Mr Hulots Holidays is quite new.
Okay. Well, let's, when people talk about Tati, one of the tendencies is, in a certain sense, to talk backward towards the masters of great silent comedy, with the two most often mentioned being Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, as if he continues with a certain kind of legacy. Now, while that may be useful, in many ways to do the comparison, but also there's a very significant contrast as well. So how did Tati himself conceive of his character and its relationship with these kinds of antecedents?
Tati did not like Chaplin.
Okay.
He admired Buster Keaton much more. And it's quite interesting to see to what extent the Hulot figure is an anti-Chaplin, iconically in terms of visual representation, where Charlie's screen persona is short, Hulot is tall, okay, fine, where Chaplin wears a bowler hat, Hulot wears a soft hat, as if to answer it, where Chaplin's trousers are baggy and too long, Hulot's are always too short by about 3 inches, where Chaplin's character always carries a prop, a walking stick that sticks out, and his face is that way down. Hulot always has an appendage which is either a fishing net or an umbrella or a stick that points that away in the opposite direction, and many other little details make you wonder whether Tati didn't, as it were, quite consciously construct Hulot out of a negative element, the opposite of elements that characterize and form the Chaplin figure. But what Tati had against Chaplin was actually not his style of dress or his appearance, but something much more fundamental.
Okay, yes.
In Tati's view, it isn't entirely fair, but in Tati's view, Chaplin makes you laugh by making you admire the funny wee chap. It's the character of the little man in Chaplin who wins out against the world, who finds a way round, who makes you laugh by getting into scrapes and getting out of them.
Absolutely.
Whereas Tati didn't want to do that at all. He didn't want you to make you laugh at the comedian. He wanted to make you laugh at the world.
Okay.
And his Hulot character is diffident, where Chaplin is cheeky, apologetic, where Chaplin is proactive and inventive, and above all, he serves to bring out the comedy, the funniness of the way other people behave. And the butt of the comedy of Les Vacances isn't anybody in particular, but all of us.
Okay. Now, this is the first film in which Hulot appears. It's not the last. He makes a number of other films with this character, and there's a certain way in which he can never get away from Hulot. Let's stop just with this film for the moment and say, what was the response to the creation of Hulot by the public and the critics, and also what do you think, perhaps following from what you've just said, makes Hulot this enduring character that also crosses cultural lines, which is a very interesting thing, because he's both thought of as the ultimate Frenchman, but yet he is this extraordinary export of a character to the entire world.
Mr Hulots Holidays was a great success when it appeared in France and then around the world. And you can always I rank countries by their openness to Monsieur Hulot. Sweden is the top Hulot country, closely followed by Australia and Argentina. But of course he's beloved throughout the English, French and everything-speaking worlds.
Right.
And it made Tati a very famous man indeed in the following years. Hulot is not actually characterized as the ultimate Frenchman. The ultimate Frenchman in Tati's cinema is the postman François in the earlier movie, in Jour de Fête. You have just watched this film, so you must realize that it's a very cosmopolitan set down by the beach. They're Dutch and Belgian and very British accents too.
Yes, indeed.
A French intellectual who's rather mop of hair. And Hulot isn't really identifiably anything. He is a kind of blandly pan-European middle-class something or other. And maybe that also helps, or was one of the items that helped the film to be widely accepted around the world, in that it isn't too typified. It isn't too engaged with anything specifically French.
Okay, let's talk about this post-war moment in and European society, because I think it's very interesting the way you bring up the fact that this is a coastal little resort, modest little place, but that's drawing people from from a number of different countries. So, what is this in terms of its portrayal of post-war leisure culture, or the traditions of summer, and what it means to be going on vacation? Because this film is many things, but certainly it's a portrait of a certain kind of vacation.
It's a creation of a certain kind of
vacation.
Okay. Of course, people had wealthy people had second homes by the beach, but France was still a really struggling economy in 1952-53, and I think that the vision of a peaceful European seaside vacation is more an aspiration than a portrayal of an existing reality at that time.
Okay.
What you don't see in the movie, because it's not shot that way, is that all around the hotel that you see are bomb sites. Right. Because it's on the south coast of Brittany that had been heavily bombed by both sides because of its naval importance. That's one of the reasons Tati chose it, because there was actually waste ground right next to the hotel where he could build the tall structure.
Right.
Where you see Martine on her balcony.
Yes, indeed.
There isn't a house there. It's on stilts. And it's also the platform for the cameras that film the long shots of the beach. So that was part of the reasons for choosing the place, was that you had some space to put things up at virtually no cost. You didn't have to knock anything down. Right. It resembles the kind of middle-class holidays that Tati had with his own family when he was a child in that part of the world, and also on the Channel coast in the 1920s, much more than it resembles anything yet really existing in post-Second World War France. So that's why I think it's interesting. It like all great works of art, it draws on reality, but also creates a reality that we all have fallen in with, and have gone on to have holidays like that. And ever since 1954, the Hôtel de la Plage, which still exists, I've been to see it, it's still really there, is booked out in the summer by British visitors wanting to spend a week in Monsieur Hulot's bedroom, which of course doesn't exist either.
You're right.
That was a little skylight added to the roof. There's no room behind it, it's just a skylight on the roof.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the concrete features of the film itself. So let's move from just the idea of vacation to the sense of time in this film, because most films, I think you can even say statistically, most films, and certainly the films that come out of a Hollywood model, have a kind of rushing forward time to them, and the ticking clock that generates suspense, the thing that must be done on this timeline, the kinds of tasks that are set up for our goal-seeking protagonist are all there, and that all kind of mirrors in many ways the kind of industrial time that we all live with, performing our tasks, whether grading papers and getting them back to students on time, or making sure you get X number of cars off the line on schedule. So how do you think that this film creates this other kind of sphere? What's that sphere and why?
Well, it's holiday time. That's to say, no time at all. It's a dream time. Film scholars have tried hard to work out just what the time lapse is. And it's reasonable to say that it's roughly a week. It's a 1 week holiday. Right. If you just measure the number of dinners sunsets and sunrises, and that's what you've got. So it's time that's structured by the stomach and structured by the sun. Right. Not by any other kinds of activities, because the things that happen within the gap between the dinner bell and the dinner bell are essentially random. They could go logically, they could go in any order. Right? Right. You go out on a boat one day or another day, or you could go play tennis one day or another day. In the film, however, although there is no, how should we say, a narrative arc that right. means these things have to be in the order they are, it is the art of the filmmaker to make them seem like a necessary sequence. And that Tati does by bleeding sound, by use of theme music, and by all sorts of tiny little tricks that tie it into the order that it has. Even so, I think most viewers, I mean, you watching this evening who've just seen the movie, and me who's seen the movie 20 times, it's still terribly difficult to write down the order in which the gags and events
Absolutely.
of Mr Hulots Holidays actually occur. And I compare that to the experience of reading Perec's Life a User's Manual, where you can remember all the stories, but my God, it's impossible to remember in which order they're placed. It is in its own kind of non-time.
Yeah. No, that also makes perfect sense. And I also think you point out the fact that it is Tati's artistry, that he's a weaver of a certain kind, and in ways that, how shall I put it, has an effect upon us as a spectator, that we think of it when we finish as a certain kind of whole, but to kind of then come back and justify beyond it's a week and it's vacation, then you really have to get very, very close to the kinds of details that you were mentioning, because there are all of these structuring motifs. I mean, including just wonderful things like the sound of the door in the dining hall, or the recurrent extra diegetic music, the music that comes from outside of the world that marks the repetitions of daily daily cycles, or let's go to something else, which is that there are patterns in Tati that aren't exactly narrative, but they're gags. There are particular kinds of gags that Tati prefers, and that are Tati-like, and there, comedy has gags in it. There are many options, and Tati chooses and prefers certain kinds of options. What in your book you write very, very well about. So what are some of the Tati preferences as a comic artist for the kinds of gags he wants that weave together as a structure?
Well, I'll start with one gag that's absolutely unique, and that there are things like it in some of his other films, but in Mr Hulots Holidays, a wee boy aged maybe 2.5, just a toddler, takes 2 ice cream cones from the ice cream salesman and very carefully walks up the steps without actually spilling them. This isn't really a gag, it is just a kind way of looking at a gag that doesn't happen, like him falling over. Because you don't do that to children. But the other gags aren't like that at all. A gag, if you like, in the cinema is a way of making you see something where somebody, let's call him X, right, mistakes something or somebody, say a Y, for something else, right, Z. So there's always this 3-part structure. But the X is never Hulot himself. The seer is us, or a person depicted on screen seeing Monsieur Hulot. The Y may be Monsieur Hulot, and of course it may be many other people who are making mistakes by being mistaken for something else. Right. That's the structure of most of the gags.
For example, the Peeping Tom sequence, in which he goes around, Hulot goes around, and he sees what he believes is the man looking in on Martine, and therefore he takes action. The camera changes angle, and it is revealed that, of course, that man is himself taking a picture of his family. Yeah.
And that's one particular structure where we, the spectator, are undeceived at exactly the same time as X, namely Mr Hulot, who has mistaken this backside for the backside of a voyeur, whereas it's really the backside of a guy taking a family photo. So that's, as it were, simultaneous undeceiving. Other gags, when the pathetic old 1924 Amilcar that Hulot drives goes out of control with the two ladies in it and goes off the road into the driveway into a large estate with its spare wheel bumping against the ground, and the klaxon therefore making a quacking sound as it goes. The camera then cuts to a laird shooting wild fowl from his wheelchair with a blunderbuss, and we are puzzled, and it's not clear that anybody else is ever undeceived as to whether he realizes what he's shooting at, or what he thinks he's shooting at, is actually the klaxon of a spare wheel of a runaway car. So there you have a moment where it's the same X takes Y for Z structure, but its resolution is dissolved, is more general. The famous scene in the cemetery, also involving the broken down car, also involving a spare tire. I mean, Tati really has something about locomotion, about vehicles.
Absolutely.
They have an obsession with it, where the spare tire gets leaves stuck to it on the wet ground and is then mistaken for a wreath and hung up, where it performs not like a wreath, but like a great big sigh as it lets out all its air. The large crowd of mourners is never undeceived, and the only people undeceived are the spectators.
Absolutely.
Who know what's going on.
Okay. Now you brought up something in discussing these particular gags and their structure, which is that Tati, brings back in many ways with this extraordinary body language he has and the setups that defines the character, the tradition of mime. But of course, we associate the mime tradition with silence in many ways. But this film is anything but silent. This is a film in which sound plays just an extraordinary role, and a role far more important than language itself. Talk a little bit about that as Tati as an artist, and this fascination he has with how he can manipulate sound and image.
Well, I think that's what first really drew me to Tati, apart from just enjoying the movies, was my puzzlement. You see, I'm a language person, and I realized that what Tati shows in, what Tati does in the Mr Hulots Holidays is to demonstrate that the difference between silent cinema and sound screen is not language, it is sound. But that sound is a communicative medium far beyond anything you can do with words. All of Tati's films are post-synchronized. None of this is natural sound, and every one of those sounds is carefully calculated, often to the exhaustion of his technical assistants, where ping pong balls had to be dropped on the floor 100 times to get exactly the right ping for post-editing. Sound binds the movie together, and it constitutes many of the gags. You've already mentioned the detuned cello string that is the noise of the swing door on the restaurant. But there are many, many others that either signal a position or a meaning, or as leitmotifs running through, and the ping pong balls are one of those, tie scenes together, and constitute an arc that runs through the whole film. People do make noise, in Tati's movies, but it's as if, you know, like a dog barking, they're just exhibiting language behavior. The actual content of what they say is either banal or fragmentary or incomprehensible or complete rubbish. And that's the point. It's just the noise humans make alongside the noise that horses make, the noise that cars make, the noise that doors make, the noise that ping pong makes, the noise that the record player makes, the funny noises that the radio makes. And one thing that I do think a little bit of a pity in the subtitling of the version that you've seen is that when you hear the French minister on the radio making a speech in one of the evenings in the drawing room, the subtitlers actually try to make it sound as though it makes sense. Actually, in French, it is complete garbage.
Okay, well, we are going to have to end with the idea of complete garbage in one of the most beautiful films of the comic tradition ever made, because we've run out of time. If you'd like to know more about City Cinematheque, or generally speaking, the programming here at CUNY-TV, please visit our website, www.cuny.tv. There you'll find the schedule of our screenings, you'll find a way to sign up to be on our mailing list, and if you wish, you can send in commentary, which we always welcome. So please visit www.cuny.tv. David, thank you for bringing a wealth of information and commentary. It's almost like you were the biographer of Jacques Tati. Come to think of it, you are. And I hope we'll have the pleasure of having you on City Cinematheque another time.
Thank you very much. I'm
Great
glad to be here.
Great. And I want to thank you for joining us today for Jacques Tati's Mr. Hulot's Holiday and for our discussion. And I hope you'll join us again in coming weeks when we continue to stroll through the archives of film history. But for now, it's goodbye.